In the late summer of 2023, Louisiana's heavy, humid air clung to the small town of St. Augustine, a sleepy community nestled deep in the bayou. Hidden behind moss-draped trees and winding marshes, St. Augustine felt like a place lost in time, its secrets buried beneath tangled woods and murky waters. The narrow roads were lined with sun-bleached houses that bore the wear of years under a relentless southern sun. Life moved slowly here, drowsy and predictable, where everyone believed they knew everyone else's business, though few ever knew the whole truth. Jasmine Carter, 28, had lived in St. Augustine for most of her adult life. With soft, thoughtful features and eyes that held the weight of untold stories, Jasmine was striking in a quiet, unassuming way. Originally from New Orleans, she'd spent her early years in the city before tragedy rerouted her path. At 21, Jasmine lost her mother in a sudden car crash. With no siblings and a strained relationship with her absentee father, she was left to navigate the grief alone. That's when her aunt, Miss Bernice, extended a lifeline. Miss Bernice, now 50, had always been the backbone of the Carter family, a strong-willed widow who raised her only child, Ayanna, with a firm hand and unwavering love. Taking Jasmine in wasn't just a familial duty, it was a way to give her niece a new beginning, a quiet place to heal. Jasmine, grateful for the refuge, moved into the modest home her aunt shared with Ayanna, hoping the quiet rhythm of small-town life would soothe her aching spirit. She found work quickly at the local elementary school, where the children adored her for her gentle demeanor and creative lessons. But despite her intelligence and natural beauty, Jasmine wrestled with a lingering sense of self-doubt she could never fully shake. Life had settled into a routine: wake up, care for Miss Bernice, go to work, return home. And yet, despite being surrounded by family, Jasmine often felt completely alone. Over the years, Miss Bernice's health had begun to fail. Cancer was slowly chipping away at the once vibrant matriarch, leaving her increasingly dependent on Jasmine and Ayanna. Jasmine did her best to care for her aunt, but watching the woman who once radiated strength wither into fragility was a cruel reminder of how quickly life could change. Miss Bernice sensed it too, the shift in her family's dynamic. She worried about the distance growing between Jasmine and Ayanna, who were once as close as sisters. Ayanna, 27, was just a year younger than Jasmine and had inherited her mother's warmth and devotion. But she was blind to the storm quietly brewing inside their home. 2 years earlier, Ayanna married Maurice Baldwin, a man she once believed to be the answer to her prayers. At 30, Maurice was smooth-talking, handsome, and appeared to be everything a woman could want. But what Ayanna didn't see, or refused to see, were the shadows beneath his charm. While she spent her days consumed with caring for her ailing mother, Maurice slowly unraveled the very fabric of their marriage. Maurice had a reputation in St. Augustine. People whispered about his past, run-ins with the law, shady business deals, but no one ever said anything outright. He had a way of making folks forget or overlook the darkness clinging to him. He was the kind of man who could twist situations and people to suit his desires, often without them realizing it. And now, he'd set his sights on Jasmine. Jasmine had always felt a bit distant from Ayanna. Their closeness faded with age, and their lives had taken different turns. But it wasn't until Maurice entered the picture that Jasmine began to truly question everything. Maurice had a way of making her feel visible, something she hadn't felt in a long time. He'd come by the house under the pretense of checking on Miss Bernice or dropping something off for Ayanna, but Jasmine knew his real reason for visiting. Their conversations started innocently, brief chats about weather or local news, but there's always a tension beneath the surface, a magnetism neither of them acknowledged aloud. Jasmine knew it was wrong. The attraction she felt for her cousin's husband was a betrayal, plain and simple. But the pull was undeniable. Maurice made her feel alive in ways that terrified her, ways her orderly, routine life never could. What began as casual visits turned into something more dangerous. A lingering touch, a too-long glance, a smile that said far more than it should. Jasmine found herself daydreaming about Maurice, replaying their exchanges, questioning if he felt it too. The guilt gnawed at her. Each time Ayanna thanked her for being such a loyal niece or praised Maurice for being a supportive husband, Jasmine felt her insides twist with shame. Yet she couldn't help it. Maurice was a drug she couldn't quit, addictive, destructive, and always lingering just close enough to tempt. One steamy August evening, after a long day tending to Miss Bernice, Jasmine and Maurice found themselves alone in the kitchen. The air was thick with humidity, and the silence between them pulsed with unspoken tension. Maurice leaned against the counter, his eyes locked on her as she busied herself with dishes, trying to ignore his stare. Finally, the silence broke. "Jasmine," Maurice said, his voice low and deliberate, "you know I care about you, right? You've been there for me, for Ayanna, for Miss Bernice. I don't know what we would have done without you." Jasmine's hands froze in the sink. She could feel the weight of his words. Every instinct told her to walk away, to stop this before it spiraled. But her feet wouldn't move. Maurice stepped closer. His hand brushed her arm, a subtle touch, but it sent a jolt through her body. "You mean more to me than you know," he whispered. "I've been trying to fight it, Jasmine, but I can't. I can't deny how I feel." Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to say no, to shut it all down. But in that moment, with his voice in her ear and the warmth of his hand on her skin, her resolve crumbled. For just a second, she let herself imagine a different reality, one where she could be free to feel what she felt, without guilt or consequence. That night, as Jasmine lay in bed, the memory of Maurice's words echoed in her mind. She hated what was happening, hated the line she had almost crossed. But she couldn't stop thinking about him. The pull was too strong. The temptation was there, growing stronger with each passing day, and Jasmine knew her life was teetering on the edge of a decision that could change everything. The weekend that would ignite a firestorm within the Carter family began innocently enough. It was mid-September, and the air in St. Augustine carried a faint whisper of the coming fall. Ayanna, worn down by the weight of her responsibilities, had planned a brief weekend trip to visit an old friend in Baton Rouge. She left that Friday afternoon, spirits lifted by the thought of a few days away to recharge. She trusted Maurice completely, believing his promise that he'd handle things at home, including checking in on her mother, Miss Bernice, who remained under Jasmine's attentive care. As Ayanna's car disappeared down the road, Maurice's mind turned toward the opportunity now laid bare. He had waited, patient and calculated, for the right moment to explore the tension simmering between him and Jasmine. Now, with Ayanna gone, the door was wide open. He knew Jasmine was conflicted. She fought hard against the feelings she tried to suppress, but he also sensed that her defenses were thinning. It was time to press forward, to see just how far she'd let herself go. That evening, Maurice casually suggested they spend some time together. With Ayanna away, he offered a simple plan, just dinner and a short drive. On the surface, it seemed like something family might do. But the tension crackling beneath the surface betrayed the truth. This was no ordinary evening. Despite the warning bells blaring in her head, Jasmine agreed. She told herself it was just a meal, just a ride. Nothing more. But deep down, she knew the line between right and wrong had already started to blur. They ate at a small, cozy cafe in town called Bonham's. Jasmine and Maurice sat near the window, the warm glow of the evening sun bathing their table in gold. They ordered simple dishes. Maurice chose a shrimp po' while Jasmine went with her favorite, gumbo. On the surface, everything was relaxed. But beneath it, an unspoken energy simmered. Maurice never took his eyes off her. His attention, intense and unrelenting, left Jasmine flustered and breathless. After dinner, he suggested they go for that drive. The sky was clear, the full moon hanging low over the quiet streets of St. Augustine. Jasmine agreed, hoping the night air might cool the fire burning in her chest, help her regain some control. They cruised the familiar roads, conversation flowing easily at first. But as they ventured further out, the streets darkened, more isolated. The mood inside the car shifted. The atmosphere thickened. Eventually, Maurice pulled over near a secluded bend in the bayou. The only sounds were rustling branches and distant nightbirds. He turned off the engine. Silence settled between them, broken only by the moonlight dancing on the still black water. Jasmine's heart thundered in her chest. She knew she should end this, say goodnight, walk away, but she couldn't. The gravity of Maurice's presence pulled at her. He reached for her hand, gently, the touch electrifying. A shiver ran up her spine. He turned toward her, expression serious, his eyes full of a desire that mirrored her own. "Jasmine," he said, voice low, barely a whisper. "I know this is messy, but what's between us? It's real." She opened her mouth to speak, to push back, but no words came. He was right. Whatever this was, it had been building for months. And now, here in the darkness, it could no longer be ignored. Maurice leaned in, still holding her hand. Then, without warning, his lips met hers. The kiss was soft, tentative, giving her room to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, Jasmine leaned into it. The dam broke. The guilt and caution that had held her back dissolved under the heat of long-suppressed longing. The kiss deepened. What started as a hesitant exchange turned into something far more urgent. Passion erupted between them, raw and unstoppable. Their hands, their bodies, their breathing, all tangled in a fevered, forbidden embrace. In the heat of that moment, in the cloaked safety of the car, they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. When it was over, reality came crashing back down on Jasmine with the weight of 1,000 bricks. She had betrayed her cousin in the most intimate, unforgivable way. The guilt was suffocating, but underneath that shame was a thrill, a rush she couldn't deny. Maurice, sensing her conflict, tried to reassure her. "It's gonna be okay," he whispered. "I got you." But Jasmine knew better. They had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and there would be consequences. In the days that followed, Jasmine and Maurice began meeting in secret. Their encounters were short, stolen, dripping with guilt and thrill. They knew it was reckless, dangerous, but the rush of it was addictive. They were careful, always calculating their movements. But in a small town like St. Augustine, no secret stays buried for long. Miss Bernice, despite her failing strength, was not blind. She noticed the shift, the way Jasmine avoided eye contact with Maurice. How Maurice seemed to hover near Jasmine just a little too often. She tried to bring it up to Jasmine once, voicing a quiet concern, but Jasmine brushed her off. Blamed exhaustion. Stress. Miss Bernice didn't believe her. She could feel it, the unease that had crept into her home, thick like fog. Then came the day the truth exploded into the open. It was a blistering August afternoon. The kind of day where the Louisiana air felt like it could smother you. Ayanna came home early from work, drained and slick with sweat, hoping for relief in the cool of her house. Maurice had left his phone on the counter, the screen glowing with a new message. Ayanna almost didn't look. But some small nagging instinct, told her to pick it up. It was from Jasmine, her cousin, her confidant, her best friend. Ayanna's heart began to pound as she opened the message thread. Her hands trembled. What she saw made the room tilt. A flood of messages. Words dripping with affection and lust. The kind no cousin should ever exchange with another woman's husband. Tears blurred her vision as the truth sank in. Her breath caught in her throat. Her worst fear confirmed. The betrayal cut her to the bone. She staggered back, the weight of heartbreak and rage crashing down on her all at once. She stormed out of the house, fury burning in her veins. Neighbors stared as she marched down the road, but she didn't care. Let them gossip. Let them talk. She needed answers. Jasmine was in the kitchen preparing dinner for Miss Bernice when Ayanna burst through the door, her face red with fury, her breath ragged. "What is this?" Ayanna demanded, shoving the phone into Jasmine's hands. Her voice cracked with a mix of rage and heartbreak. Jasmine's eyes went wide as she saw the screen. Her heart sank. Her guilt reflected back at her through those glowing words. She tried to speak, to explain, but the words failed. Because deep down she knew there was no explanation that could make this right. Ayanna wasn't hearing anything anymore. She had trusted Jasmine like a sister, and the depth of betrayal was too devastating to process. As the confrontation escalated, Maurice entered the house, immediately sensing the storm that had finally broken loose. His attempts to calm Ayanna only made things worse. The air was thick with emotion, anger, hurt, betrayal, finally released after months of tension. Miss Bernice, frail and worn down by illness, tried to intervene from her seat, but her voice was swallowed by the shouting and chaos. It felt as if the family was falling apart in real time. Every hidden resentment, every buried word, was now erupting, poisoning the space between them. Ayanna's voice cracked as she demanded to know how long the affair had been going on. How could the two people she loved most betray her like this? Jasmine, overcome with shame, couldn't even look her cousin in the eye. Maurice, ever the manipulator, tried to twist the narrative, minimizing what had happened and shifting blame, but Ayanna saw through every word. The trust that once held them together had been shattered beyond recognition, the damage too deep and the edges too sharp to ever be pieced back together. In the tense days that followed, Ayanna withdrew into herself. She barely spoke, crushed beneath the weight of betrayal. Images of Maurice and Jasmine together haunted her, their secret messages, their stolen moments. Her anger fused with grief, and she felt herself unraveling, drifting through a fog of confusion and heartbreak. Needing to escape, Ayanna packed a bag and drove off without a destination, fleeing from St. Augustine in silence. While she was gone, Maurice saw her absence as an opportunity. He reached out to Jasmine, and despite her dread and guilt, she agreed to meet him. He suggested a quiet, remote spot in the swamp, a secluded place both of them knew too well. The sky was overcast as Jasmine drove through the narrow backroads. The gloomy weather matched her mood, conflicted, anxious, full of regret. How had things spiraled so far beyond her control? Maurice was already waiting when she arrived, his expression unreadable. They walked deeper into the swamp, tension following them like a shadow. When they reached a small clearing, Maurice began to speak, mumbling vague reassurances, offering ideas for how they might move forward. But to Jasmine, his words rang hollow. She could feel the manipulation. Her instinct screamed that something wasn't right. Then, from behind a clump of trees, Ayanna emerged. Her face was twisted in anguish and fury. She had followed them, driven by heartbreak and suspicion. The sight of her cousin and husband alone in that hidden place ignited something uncontrollable inside her. The confrontation exploded. Ayanna's voice was raw, hurling accusations with a pain so sharp it cut the air around them. Maurice tried to de-escalate the situation, but Ayanna was beyond reason. Trembling and seething, she turned and stormed toward Maurice's car, ripping open the glove compartment and grabbing the handgun he always kept inside. Jasmine's blood ran cold. She stood frozen as Ayanna pointed the weapon at her, hands shaking, voice breaking with fury. "Why? I trusted you. Both of you." Jasmine and Maurice pleaded with her, begging her to calm down. Maurice stepped forward, trying to disarm her, but in the confusion, he inadvertently moved into Jasmine's line of sight. Ayanna's finger tensed on the trigger. The gun went off. The sharp crack of the shot echoed through the swamp, silencing the trees and birds in an instant. Jasmine staggered backward, her eyes wide in disbelief, before collapsing to the forest floor. Blood darkened her shirt, the stillness of her body deafening. Maurice, acting on instinct, lunged toward Ayanna and wrestled the gun from her trembling hands. They stood in silence, stunned by what they had done, by the finality of it. Maurice, breathing heavily, looked down at Jasmine's body and made a chilling decision. "We need to hide her," he said coldly. Too numb to argue, Ayanna followed him. Together, they dragged Jasmine's lifeless body to a deeper part of the swamp. They weighed her down with stones and watched as the murky water swallowed her whole. A heavy silence fell. The reality of what they'd done settled over them like a wet shroud. Later that night, they returned to Miss Bernice's home. Shaken but trying to act composed, they came up with a story. Maurice claimed he had met Jasmine to end things, that during the conversation, she became upset and stormed off into the night. Ayanna, now playing the role of the betrayed wife turned forgiver, added that she had accepted his apology but had no idea where Jasmine went afterward. Miss Bernice listened, visibly concerned, but something in her gut didn't sit right. As soon as they left, she tried calling Jasmine. Each call went straight to voicemail. Panic began to bloom. By nightfall, with no word from Jasmine and no trace of her anywhere, Miss Bernice's worry turned into dread. Jasmine never stayed out without telling her. Something was wrong. She called the police and reported her daughter missing, expressing her fear that something terrible had happened. Police responded quickly. Officers arrived at Miss Bernice's home and took down every detail. She urged them to question Maurice and Ayanna about the events of that night. When they were questioned, the couple stuck to their story. But Ayanna stumbled over her words. Her voice wavered. Detectives took note. In a private conversation with officers, Miss Bernice revealed what she suspected, that Jasmine and Maurice had been having an affair and that it had caused tension between the cousins. She was adamant Jasmine would never disappear without a word. The police began to take the case more seriously. Maurice and Ayanna quickly became prime suspects. Investigators secured a warrant to search Maurice's car and home. Inside the glove box, they found the handgun. A single bullet was missing from the magazine. The weapon was sent for forensic testing. Gunshot residue tests were administered on both Ayanna and Maurice. When the results came back, it confirmed what police feared. Ayanna had residue on her hands and clothing. Under questioning, Ayanna initially denied everything. But faced with the evidence, her story started to shift. She admitted to taking the gun from the car and confronting Jasmine, but claimed she only fired it into the air, just to scare her. She insisted she didn't mean to hurt anyone. Detectives weren't convinced. They obtained cell phone data from both Maurice and Ayanna, tracking their movements the night Jasmine disappeared. The data led police to the same remote swamp area. Cadaver dogs were brought in. After hours of searching through dense, muddy terrain, the dogs led officers to a shallow spot where Jasmine's body had resurfaced, partially uncovered, the stones still tied around her waist. The case was now airtight. Maurice and Ayanna were arrested on the spot. The weight of the evidence, combined with the guilt, broke them down. Both confessed. Maurice admitted to helping dispose of the body. Ayanna confessed to pulling the trigger in a moment of blind rage. The trial was scheduled for October 15th. Miss Bernice, heartbroken and weary, attended every day, watching as the two people she once loved and trusted faced justice. The courtroom was heavy with silence as the verdicts were delivered. Maurice was sentenced to 15 years for his role in covering up the murder. Ayanna received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miss Bernice sat motionless, her eyes full of tears, not just for her daughter, but for the family that had once been so close, now destroyed. Justice had come, but it could never bring Jasmine back. And as she sat alone in the silence of her home, Miss Bernice knew one thing for sure. The echoes of that night in the swamp would haunt her forever. And please stay with us as we continue to expose and bring to you more stories like this. Keep watching, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a moment of these stories. This is Ruthless Realities. Until next time.